My name is Elon Osborne, and I like to talk about movies, audio, and music. And today I'm going to try to answer the question, is XLR really that much better than RCA, aka digital coax? And even then, is expensive shielded coax cables better than super basic ones you can get on Amazon?
Specs.
So just to give a little bit more detail on which cables we are dealing with today. Number one, we're dealing with the Amazon BasX digital coax cable. According to the online description, it says corrosion resistant gold-plated RCA connectors and split tip center pins for enhanced contact pressure and conductivity. Durable design, strong flexible PVC exterior, minimal energy loss and protection against RF-EM interference. And these are about like $6. So these are pretty cheap when it comes to digital coax cables that are gold plated. Number two, we have the Aperion audio RCA patch cables, also gold plated, but it's got this pretty nifty feature where once you stick it onto the input, this thing spins to tighten it on there even more. Pretty cool. These cables are 3 feet long, which is usually totally fine because you normally have your amp and your preamp right next to each other. So 3 feet should be plenty. But with that being said, this 3-foot cable will still cost you $25. You can also get lengths of 9 feet or 16 feet, which is obviously more expensive. But yeah, this is about middle of the road. This isn't like Mogami expensive where it's like $75 for an RCA cable. It also says that this is double shielded, it is 99.99% OFC copper on the inside, and the insulation is a nylon braid. So these are braided. So that's typically what you're dealing with when you're going from a super basic digital coax cable to a more expensive digital coax cable. It's braided, it's shielded better, etc. And lastly, I've got these color-coded XLR cables. That I just got off Amazon. It was a 10-pack. Not too expensive, but I mean, XLR cables are XLR cables. Maybe I'll do a future video about comparing the various prices of XLR cables, but I understand because RCA cables are unbalanced, so I get having to spend more if you want more shielding, braided materials, etc. But XLR, just the way that they're designed, XLR is XLR. So I really don't see why you should pay a lot for an XLR cable because they're already balanced with the 3 prongs. I could be wrong though, so maybe I'll make a future video about that.
Setup.
Alright, the components we're dealing with are the IOTA AVX17 preamp because it has both RCA and XLR outputs. So we might as well make it fair and test it with a processor that can do both. And also being able to handle both XLR and RCA cables is the Outlaw Audio Model 7000X external amplifier, because this is one of the few scenarios where you're actually going to need RCA or XLR cables when it comes to audio in your home theater system, going from your pre-outs to an external amp. Because if you're just using the internal amps of your receiver, you don't have to worry about pre-outs, etc. I'm going to hook it up real quick and start with the Amazon BasX RCA cables. And once again, pay attention to how I connect them to the external amp for better heat distribution. And just another tip if you're dealing with the Outlaw Model 7000X, since it can do both RCA and XLR inputs, be sure and switch the toggle switches underneath the inputs so you're set to the right input. And as you might have guessed, with this setup, I am not dealing with any height channels. I'm just going to do your standard 7-channel bed layer system. I'll connect some subwoofers as well, but just want to let you know that's the system I'm going to be dealing with in this test. Now, dealing with the Aperion audio RCA cables, it will look exactly the same because I'm going to be putting it in the exact same outputs, putting them in the exact same inputs, but I'm just going to show you how it can do that nifty little tightening feature. Locked, nice and tight, pretty sweet. And then I'll put it down here. And also just as a reminder, since I am using RCA cables and from previous tests, I do know that the IOTA AVX17 produces a bit of a grounding loop hum when I'm dealing with RCA cables. And the Outlaw model 7000X, I will be using a grounding wire going from this grounding pin and connecting it to the chassis of the IOTA AVX17, just FYI. And that's what it looks like with all the Aperion audio RCA cables connected and the grounding wire connected from the Outlaw Audio Model 7000X to the chassis of the IOTA AVX17. And now let's hook it up with some XLR cables. Ta-da! So colorful. How do they sound? So to test out these 3 different cable configurations, I watched Blade Runner 2049, at least the intro, because of those huge sweeping synths that just fill the soundstage. I also watched the alien action scene at the beginning of A Quiet Place Part 2. I like that one because it cuts back and forth between intense, chaotic audio to the perspective of the deaf daughter. So you can just barely hear her heartbeat, but nothing else. So I like that dynamic shift between really loud to instantly quiet. And I like to see how my components and my speakers can handle that sudden dynamic shift. And lastly, I tested one of the fight scenes from Scott Pilgrim vs. the World, just because there is so much going on in that entire movie. Music, sound effects, dialogue. So I love to test out any system with that movie in particular because it has it all, and a lot of times all at once. So what are the results? Well, it could have been my mind playing tricks on me because it's hard to ABC these different scenarios like that because I have to unplug and start the scenes over and all that stuff. To me, it seemed like the Amazon BasX cheap RCA coax cables were a little bit warmer and just not as detailed as the other 2 scenarios. Again, this could be my mind playing tricks on me, but it seemed like the dialogue especially was just not as clear. Still pretty clear, it still sounded good because I'm using an external amp and because the IOTA AVX17 is a phenomenal processor, but it did seem like the dialogue got a little bit lost in the action scenes, particularly in Scott Pilgrim vs. the World, because there's so much going on while they're talking. So it still sounded good for what it's worth, but I think you do get a slightly better audio quality when going from just your basic coax RCA cable to something that's more expensive, braided, double shielded, etc. But regarding the Aperion audio RCA cables and XLR cables, as far as just pound for pound audio quality, there really wasn't much of a difference. The dialogue pretty much sounded the same, the action pretty much sounded the same. So as far as sonic differences between the 3, the Amazon BasX is lacking ever so slightly, and the Aperion audio and XLR cables, they're the same. But here is my reasoning for still going with XLR if that is some goal you have in the future to have a preamp or AVR that has XLR outputs, okay? The whole philosophy behind RCA versus XLR, it's not exactly just, it just sounds so much better. It's because you're basically buying insurance, okay? When dealing with XLR cables, you're buying into a philosophy where because it's grounded, because it's balanced, you are automatically dealing with an audio signal that will have a lower noise floor because it's balanced and a cleaner audio signal. So I liken that to insurance because you might be in the mindset of, say, you know what, I don't want to deal with it. I don't want to troubleshoot anything, radio frequencies or noise from how my house is wired. There are so many different factors of noise that can be introduced into a home theater system. So dealing with XLR cables is your insurance to automatically let you know that you will be getting the best noise floor, you will be getting rid of any radio frequency interference, etc. Just right out the box. It's already done. You don't have to worry about it. With Amazon BasX cables, you are paying a lot less, but it also means there could be some noise introduced into your system. So you get what you pay for. And say if you're dealing with a Marantz or a Denon AVR that only has RCA pre-outs, getting a more expensive braided double shielded RCA cable, you are also paying that premium for insurance that you will also not have to deal with any of those interference issues or grounding loops, etc. Now, is there a difference between the $25 Aperion audio braided RCA cable versus, a Mogami RCA cable that is twice or 3 times expensive? That's a whole new ball of wax, and I hope to test that out in the future as well. But if there's one thing I want you to take away from this video, it's not that pound for pound these cables make any difference in the audio. Like I said, there is a very, very slight difference in the audio when you're dealing with Amazon BasX versus a higher end RCA cable. Yes, but don't think of it as better audio quality per se. Think of it as a premium you're paying just to eliminate any possible chance that you're going to get some interference or noise introduced into your system. So I just want you to wrap your head around that. So going forward, I still would recommend, if you have an ultimate home theater system in mind, to have a goal of having an AVR or a preamp that has XLR outputs. So that way you're guaranteed the best possible noise floor and best possible rejection of any noise that may be introduced into the signal path. Because that's what you're ultimately paying for. And that's why those tend to be more expensive. Not because they're so superior in audio quality, but it allows you as a consumer to not have to worry. And the extra price you pay to not have to worry is big business.
And there you have it.
Thank you for joining me on this comparison of those 3 different types of cables. Now it's your turn. If you have external amplifiers in your system, what kind of cables are you using? Are you using cheap RCA cables? More expensive braided double shielded RCA cables? XLR cables? Are you using an AVR or a preamp? Do you have an ultimate goal to eventually own a preamp with XLR outputs? Let's start a conversation, people. As always, please be kind to each other out there. Don't just watch TV and movies, experience them. And of course, always be listening.